Hey, what's up? Whenever I watch a new player or someone who has been playing for maybe a year play as Puff, it usually looks pretty good. They get their upper rests and everything. And I generally feel like everyone is pretty confident in their Puff. But what happens a lot of the time when they meet someone who is stronger than them is that they simply crack under the pressure. They have nothing to rely on when they can just try things and see what happens. Basically, no one has a real game plan, at least from my experiences. Now, a key point in that is that I'm talking about beginners and somewhat new players. If you're an intermediate or advanced player, I don't think you'll get much use out of the information here. But if you're looking to build a sort of foundation or a little guide, quick guide for every character, I think this could be quite valuable to give a broad understanding of what you're supposed to do. So let's go over a simple game plan for every top tier character and the low tiers. Starting with Fox. In the neutral game, it's a bit risky. You never really want to leave the platforms. Of course, if you look at pro gameplay, Hungrybox spends a bit of time on the ground every now and again, trying to look for some grabs and shit. But in my experience, if you're not sure when you're supposed to be on the ground, it's better to just stay on the platforms. Now, what are you supposed to do from the platforms? Well, in neutral, starting from 0, the goal is simply to get 5%. If you can get 5% on Fox, Pound starts to combo into knockdown, which is really valuable. So what does 4%? Basically everything. There are some games even with professional Puffs who just jab the opponent twice to get that tiny percent that is needed. So what you're supposed to do when you get that percent is to execute your punish game. Now, the simplest and easiest punish game for Puff versus Fox, in my experience, in the lower intermediate games, is to look for pounds. Because after you get the 5%, Pound knocks down the opponent. From this you can do a lot of things. My favorite is to go for Pound jab. Because if they're not expecting it or they miss the tech, then, you just get a free jab reset rest. It looks pretty complicated, but it's really not. The timing is super lenient. But of course you can also try to read the tech. You can even go for a rest directly after the Pound if it looks good. And generally, there's always some option that works after Pound. It's just a really good move. And to hit the Pound, I would recommend doing something called a Spider Pound, which is when you're on the platform, you shield drop, you pound. That's it. It's not very complicated, but it's generally the most safe and consistent way to engage with Pound. Otherwise, if they start to understand your game plan and if they're not falling for it anymore, you can go for the normal back air grab, that kind of shit. But be careful. Grab requires you to be on the ground usually, and being on the ground is very dangerous against Fox. So only do it if you feel comfortable and that you know your opponent isn't going to capitalize hard on it. Now, Marth is my absolutely favorite matchup as Puff. It's a matchup that I have the best performance in as well. Now, I'm no expert on any of these matchups, but Marth, at least at a lower level, is really simple in my opinion, and I see a lot of people struggle with it when they're starting, when they really shouldn't. So, against Marth, there is one simple trick, and that is to crouch and wave dash. So, Puff's crouch animation is a bit weird, so it's actually only good in the beginning before he starts bouncing up and down. And one way to circumvent this is to wave dash, or generally just don't sit around in crouch. Try to use it actively, move around and crouch when you think they're gonna attack. But this is one of the few matchups where Puff is actually really good on the ground, or where you basically have to be on the ground. So your main neutral attack plan is just short hop, fast fall, bair. It's really quick, it's really short, and it's really good because you will be crouching most of the time, even when you're attacking, kind of, because the attack is so quick that you land fairly quickly. But how do you actually kill the Marth? This is actually the point where I feel like a lot of people struggle at this specific point, and that is, what rest setups are there and how do you kill the Marth? Well, the easiest one that 90% of beginners and even intermediate and honestly some advanced players will fall for is just the classic rest the grab or dash attack. Now, are the morphs going to infinitely keep trying to grab you after it doesn't work for 3 times? No, they are going to try to mix it up and shit. But all morphs, including Sane, will want to go for a grab every now and again. So it becomes this kind of mix-up game. But having a crouch rest in your arsenal is incredibly strong. And it usually also works against dash attack, which can lead to some pretty nice early kills. Otherwise, if you feel like that isn't working or you need a more active game plan, just try to get him off stage. I know that's basic, that's what all kind of characters want to do all the time. But with Marth, he has a pretty bad recovery against Puff, I would say, because Hungry Box usually plays around just trying to grab the Marth near the ledge and back throwing him. Because if you can get a hit of that back throw or get a hit while Marth is off stage, it's an easy kill. And even if you don't get a hit, you can always set up the Marth killer by rolling to the edge and light shielding down to the left and right, down shielding away from the stage. So the Puff Ditto is pretty boring, honestly. It kind of depends on how good the players are, because if you look at the average Puff Ditto, it goes on for a while and it's really repetitive. It's a lot of bears, and that's also what I recommend in neutral, just to backer them over and over again. Try not to get hit, it's not that complicated. But when you reach a more advanced or expert level, you will start to be able to incorporate down air rests and down air up smash, which suddenly gives you a lot of early kills. So if you want to step up your Ditto game, I would highly recommend at least practicing down air up smash, because it is actually a lot more tricky than you expect, but it's definitely not impossible to be able to incorporate. One little tip I have though is to never forward smash, because if they shield or crouch cancel or avoid it in any sort of capacity, they can either just rest or up smash, which will just ruin your entire game. The Puff Ditto is really about not dying. You want to live for as long as possible. In the same vein, using up smash out of shield is really surprisingly good against people who are not experienced in the Ditto, because a lot of people will drift in when they back air your shield, forward air or down air or whatever, and if you can get a free up smash kill, then the game is in your hands. Now, against Falco, it's pretty similar to Fox. Of course, you could discuss like power shielding and how to play around that, but my general advice is just treat it the exact same as Fox. Stay on the platforms, try to get like 5% and then go for pound rest. But there is one difference, and that is that you really don't want to be stuck in shield. The same of course applies to Fox, but I feel like it's more common for Puffs to get stuck in shield against Falco, and it has been a massive problem for me as well. What I'm talking about is when you're on the ground, you try to power shield or something, you miss an L cancel and you just shield. Because if the Falco has some experience, then the shield pressure will be really fucking deadly for you. Now, Sheik used to be one of my problem matchups. It actually used to be my worst. But I got a very nice coaching session with a top Puff named Dawson that kind of cleared up the game plan and strategy for me. So I'm gonna try to do a quick TLDR here. So in neutral, you want to crouch after every aerial. Now, is this optimal? Maybe not, but against 90% of Sheiks, especially on unranked, it will just work. Crouch, or if you feel like you can combo the aerials into each other, go for it, but otherwise just crouch after every aerial. Because the thing is, when you're low percent, Sheik can't do shit against you. You're really strong. You need to remember that when you're low percent, if you crouch correctly, then it's pretty safe and easy to play. So when it comes to punishing, of course you can rest almost everything that Sheik does. Like, honestly, if the Sheik doesn't have the knowledge on how to play the Puff matchup, you can rest pretty much everything out of shield and crouch. There are very few options that Sheik have to bring you up to like 20, 30, 40% when she can actually start doing shit to you. So my advice is just to crouch, shield, and if you're just practicing, I would recommend going for rests as much as possible, just to get a feel of what spacings you need to have in order to be able to rest. Another punishing option if the Sheik is playing well and you're not getting a lot of rest is to try to up-air them, because there is no real way for Sheik to contest a puff that is directly below them. If you're like diagonally below them, then her forward air is really good, but if you're directly below her, her down air can't really win against your up air. So even if she tries to double jump or do some shit to avoid it, you're never really gonna lose anything by going for an up air if the Sheik is right above you. So in my opinion, Falcon is one of the most unintuitive matchups for Puff, because there aren't really a lot of tricks. In neutral, you want to use a lot of full hops, which seems a bit weird considering you want to avoid the knee and all of that. But all of his moves and aerials have such long startup that you usually are able to contest them with bair or drift away and play around that. Another intuitive thing about Falcon is how you kind of punish him, because when you approach him, you actually want to get really close to him, preferably behind him. Because surprisingly, he doesn't really have a lot of scrambling options. You can kind of drift through his shield, for example, and he doesn't really have any great options to contest you. His out of shield options are pretty trash. If you for whatever reason feel like the Falcon is not really being aggressive enough or starting to play defensively against your aggressive play, one kind of cheesy tool that isn't really too good is simply up air, short hop up air, which in reality shouldn't really work. I mean, they can just the Falcon can just instant up air and you lose to it every time, or you can try to grab it. But I find a lot of Falcons kind of panic if they don't hit anything concrete, and if you stay high up and if you slowly, you know, suffocate them with bairs, and they start to do dumb things like trying to stomp you, for example, which upper kind of beats, and upper is really good against Captain Falcon, because if you land it correctly, I mean, it's just a rest, and otherwise you can usually combo it into grab or at least a pound, or you can do a lot of things off it, or just chain a bunch of uppers together. But I think the main point in the Falcon matchup is to not be afraid of him. With some characters, like I would say Marth and Fox primarily, you don't really want to be incredibly aggressive. You want to kinda play it safe and try to go for a quick jab every now and again and then get a finishing blow. But with Falcon you really have the tools to approach and kind of be a bit more active. Now, Peach is also one of my favorite matchups personally, which might surprise a lot of you, and that is simply because it's a very, very careful, delicate and defensive matchup. In neutral, you want to play, like I said, careful and defensively. And you shouldn't really ever lose a trade against Peach, because her aerials are pretty meh, especially compared to like bair. There's a huge difference between those. Now, with turnips, it gets a lot more complicated. Despite what some people might say, the matchup isn't like 99-1 favor towards Puff. Peach has a lot of counterplay, and that goes for all of these matchups. It's not like these tricks will work every single game, otherwise I would be #1. But the point is that they lay a foundation upon which you can later add mix-ups. And with Peach, the mix-ups, I mean, they're not necessary until quite a late stage in my experience. As long as you're able to play around the turnips, then the Peach is usually gonna have to do a lot more work than you in order to get the same impact. But at the cost of having such an easy neutral game, the punish game is really, I don't know if hard is the correct word, but it's very hard to find a rest. There aren't really any consistent rest setups. There are some sick like turnip throw shit, and you can of course try to up tilt them or drill them, but generally there aren't like any easy rest setups. But on the other hand, Peach's rest punish is complete trash. So if you're playing against someone and you feel like you have a rest, then the punish is usually going to be a lot more mild than against other characters. You can be a bit more liberal with the rests. Just remember that your game plan shouldn't really rely on rests. Now, ice climbers. In neutral, no matter if wobbling is off or on, you don't want to get grabbed. The thing is, even with wobbling off, ice climbers have a lot of cool shit they can do against Puff. I have to admit that. A lot of the desyncs and handoffs are pretty sick, but they hurt a lot. Like for example, as long as Puff has a tiny bit of percent, there are some combos that ICs can execute that basically zero to death you. So how do you avoid the grabs? Well, you stay on platforms and you try to attack upwards, you try to drift upwards after every attack. It can be upwards pound or simply a rising bear or rising fair, whatever. Just never stay without a hitbox in the grab range of ICs. So the best place for you to be might seem like the top platform, and I think it is honestly the best place to be. It's just that it's incredibly boring, and at some point you need to engage with the ICs. Unless you have some percent, then you can stall at the top platform. It's up to how much you value your moral compass. When it comes to the punish game, I don't really think there are any huge real punishing tricks as far as I know. Just remember that, as I mentioned earlier, ICs have a great punish, so it's kind of the opposite of Peach, where you don't really want to miss a rest ever. It's not on the Fox level of bad, but it's still pretty bad to miss a rest against ICs. Now, there are 18 characters left, which I have skipped, and that is for one reason. The game plan is incredibly similar against all of them. Now, of course, there are a lot of matchup depth and matchup knowledge, and it still matters. Like, there's a huge difference between a Kirby and a Samus. And Samus especially is pretty unique amongst all of these characters, and Yoshi as well. But I think in general, if you want a simple beginner or intermediate game plan, it's very similar against all of them. Basically, it's don't go for rests unless you're super certain that you're gonna hit it, if you have a setup or you're experienced with the matchup, and don't get hit. Just try to play carefully with Bear, and things usually sort themselves out. Now, there are some harder matchups in my opinion. I think Ganondorf can be a bit tricky actually for Puff, which might surprise some of you, but it's simply about being patient and not getting hit. Young Link has a lot of projectiles and projectile spam, and I shouldn't really give my opinion on the Young Link matchup, because I'm pretty terrible at it, considering my normal level. But I mean, it's still a low tier, back airs work, he doesn't really have any great kill setups as long as you avoid the bombs. And I mean, that's pretty much it for all the low tiers. Just be patient, use back airs. And if you're struggling with a specific low tier character, or mid tier I guess, then just research that character as much as you can. There are a lot of good old Smashboard threads with the information you need. I personally was up against a Samus in the bracket that I've lost to before, but I just spent 10 minutes before the set googling, looking up the matchup, really trying to read and understand it, and then it's a lot easier. So if you have a problem matchup within the low tiers, look it up. It's gonna help a lot more than I can explain in this 20-minute video. But anyways, I hope this is helpful to some of the new Puff mains that are on the rise. And if you enjoy the content, I don't know, subscribe, that will help, I guess, or not, it's up to you. Bye bye.